Well, welcome to the podcast. This is the podcast from CMC about rope and rescue topics. So today we are going to discuss what we do with our belay line when using an Arizona Vortex. Do we put it high through the vortex along with our main line or our second line? Do we run it low along the ground, or do we do something in between? So one of the more popular in between ways of dealing with a belay line is to suspend it temporarily from an AZTEK kit from the Arizona Vortex. So we've got Doug McElmury, LeRoy Harbach, Wayne Chapman, and John McKently joining us, and we are going to roundtable what we're going to do with our belay line. So, it's pretty hot topic. If you ask three different people, you'll get three different answers, probably. Sometimes you'll get the terrible answer of "it depends."
That was the one I was going to go with.
I stole it from you. It depends. So that was the option 4 or option 3B maybe. But so each one I think has a place. They've each got their benefits. So just spitballing it, we'll just shoot it out there and get everybody's take on it, and then go around the room and discuss it. But so Doug, high, low, or in an AZTEK? What are you thinking?
I think the AZTEK gives you the most flexibility and some of the biggest advantages with shock absorption.
All right. Well, Doug goes for flexibility and shock absorption. All right. LeRoy, what do you think?
It depends.
All right. It's an excellent answer. I'm just kidding. It's a terrible answer. What do you really think?
Okay. No. I honestly think it depends on what kind of system you're running. If you're running a twin tension system, then you take them both high. If you're running a tension main slack belay for whatever reason, then one high, one low. Although I'm not adverse to using that AZTEK as a transition event if you're running the belay line on the ground.
Okay. Yep. I can see the benefit of that. Wayne, shooting from the hip right away. High, low, or through an AZTEK or something else?
Well, I learned initially, belay through an AZTEK, but I've switched over to both high.
Okay. Cool. So Wayne is both high. I'm going to circle back around to all these, and we'll talk about them. John, what do you think?
Kind of opposite of Wayne. I learned belay low or belay not through the high directional at all. I kind of like the AZTEK thing, except for the fact that it adds a level of complexity and equipment in there that I would like to leave out or can cause you problems. I mean, I think it's good for getting the rope off the ground when the load is further down, but as far as the transitioning, I think nowadays I'm going for the AZTEK.
Wow, interesting. I would not have assumed as many AZTEKs. So my thoughts on it, and at least where I work, as we always have the belay line down low to the ground, and I tell them to make an edge transition that would not make for cool pictures. Like I want the basket just barely off the ground and over the edge, and then the attendant can get over. For me, I don't see I don't know. I just don't think it's there's a reason to have the basket 4 feet off the ground when you're transitioning the edge. If you look at some of those tests that were done, and the tests we're talking about are the 2005 IDERS presentation or 2007 IDERS presentation. It was the 2005 tests presented at 2007 IDERS by Reed Thorne from Ropes at Rescue. Those tests, definitely show that a belay line independent of the vortex will create a massive length fall. But I also see a basket that's 4 feet off the ground in those pictures and tests. So but for me, belay line low at work anyways, belay line low and just look like you're scared going over the edge. I mean, it makes for, not very cool pictures, but it makes for a really safe edge transition. So, if you want to run both lines high, I don't know. Are there any situations where you wouldn't want to run both lines high? Anybody got any take on that? Like Wayne, you said both lines high. Is there any situations where you wouldn't want them both high?
Well, I mean, talking in a little bit more depth here on the topic, obviously, if you can keep the litter low or slide vertically through the transition, then switch to horizontal and drop get rid of the drop altogether. That's one thing. But what we see people do is they bring the load a foot or 2 or 3 off the ground, right?
Yeah.
Get their attendant out, spin around, and go down, or as they come up, right? Yep. So my thought process has always been, because that's what people tend to do, right, is if you have a failure of the main line or the high point, you're going for a ride regardless of where the belay line is at that particular point.
Definitely.
Right?
And I guess I should back up a little bit and say that, like, what are we actually trying to prevent? Like, what are we accounting for? The two main topics are the failure of the high directional. Are we worried about the vortex failing? Does the AZTEK or belay line high or low save that? Or are we worried about a failure of our main line? Does a high, low, or through an AZTEK save that? So, no, you're right. I should have highlighted that a little bit better.
So I think it goes even deeper than that, right? You look at Kirk Mothra's recent testing of sharp edges and all that stuff. Obviously, if you have one high, one low, and you have a failure of one, you basically have a scenario where it's a single loaded line hitting that sharp edge. So, and again, there's like I've said in previous podcasts, never say never, never say always. I've come to do both high, but I would, or both high. And if you're worried about the vortex, over a long haul, lower them both to the ground.
Yeah.
Lower the main and the belay to the ground.
Yeah, I mean, which is, I was going to get to it later, but that's made much easier by a twin tension system. So,
right.
If you do have a dedicated main, dedicated belay, Leroy said one up, one down. I'm cool with that. But a twin tension system, whether you're using MPDs, clutches, IDs, whatever, definitely allows you the ability to bounce back and forth. When I teach not for the department I work for, personally, I'm okay. My personal belief is that if the vortex is lashed down, guide down, bolted down, whatever, but then I just put both lines up high and just eliminate the complexity. Like John said, you're adding a lot of extra equipment and people and movements into a system.
Well, now let me ask about that, because Wayne said, if you're worried about the vortex, then run them both low. But once the load's, in my opinion, once the load's over the side and moving, no matter which way it's going, it could be coming up, it could be going down. Generally, the vortex is unstable and nothing's going to happen. If the vortex is going to tip, it's going to be during the edge transition going down or going up. And once the load's way down the line, the further the rope's out, the less effect it has on that high directional moving out and doing anything. I mean, assuming that the litter tender is going down the fall line and not being crazy about it,
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think that's right. I think once you're over the edge, then it's not it's going to be a non-issue unless you're doing some sort of track and line operation. Then, obviously that front component vector is changing and going to cause a resultant change. But for those that said through the AZTEK, we would put a carabiner or pulley on the bottom of it. Doug, you mentioned right before we got fired up and recording about seeing some change from carabiner to pulley on the bottom of an AZTEK.
Yeah, I think really it kind of depends. What are you trying to do? Obviously the carabiner is going to give you a little added friction, and if you're worried about a drop, you're going to have some added weight being taken up by that. However, once you lower it down and put the pulley on the bottom, you have built-in edge pro right at the edge. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages either way. I think you really have to look at at your situation, at your scenario, and what are you dealing with.
Yeah, I agree. Interestingly, looking at the videos from the 2007 ITERS presentation, it was suggested that the carabiner on the bottom prevents the impact force from hitting the belay anchor, and which was interesting to me because the force has to go somewhere. Like I think that force ends up on the rescuer at that point, which doesn't seem like the greater of the two options. Be it the belay anchor or the attendant. I'd rather put it on the belay anchor. And like if we're that worried about our belay anchor, is that a great belay anchor anyways? So,
and then the 2012 testing actually does a nice job of showing how much force was run through that AZTEK too, and the difference between utilizing the blue and the orange prusik, and there's pretty substantial differences in the loads that it encounters.
There were, and the tests were also on Tom Pendley's site, the desertrescue.com. I don't remember. Do you know if any of the tests were run through a pulley, or was it all through carabiner?
No, they were all carabiners. If I recall correctly, I think everything was carabiners, but the forces were definitely different depending on which of the AZTEK prusik cords were pinned.
And now that's a function of the shock absorption of the 8 mil cordage sliding through the prusiks. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Which
and there's some pretty good glazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, just
definitely.
for the benefit of the people that haven't read those reports.
Yep.
And I know this is a purely audio podcast, so they don't see it, but maybe we should explain exactly what you're talking about when you say the carabiner on the bottom and the pulley on the bottom and some of that sort of thing, because if you haven't seen it, they may not understand what you're talking about.
No, you're right. So, good point, John. So the belay line, instead of being run through a pulley at the head of the Vortex, would be suspended on the bottom of an AZTEK kit that's raised or lowered, equal with the yoke knot, double long tail bowline, double butterfly, 2 figure eights, whatever you got, to keep the belay line, just supported, but just even with that yoke knot. So, at the bottom of an AZTEK kit, you got your orange pulley up at the blue head. You got of the Vortex, you've got your blue pulley down low. And on that Omni swivel, you would either have a carabiner only or a carabiner and a pulley. And your belay line would run through either the carabiner, just the carabiner, or through the pulley. And it's lowered, again, even with the yoke knot, if you can keep it that way. And then the next question is, and I haven't done that in a long time, does the belay line go all the way to the ground and rest on some Edge Pro, or does it hover an inch or two off the ground? Like, what's the
slightly off the ground?
All right, so
still, it replaces or helps the Edge Pro by getting the rope's not in Edge Pro necessarily. It depends on the edge and everything like that, but it's largely supported by the AZTEK and the Vortex.
Right. Would you still support? Would you still provide edge protection?
Yeah, I think it's really important. Yeah, it's really important that you put Edge Pro, because especially if you switch to a Hall system, that AZTEK and that pulley is going to swing back. Yeah. And now that rope is going to be directly against the edge. So I think it's critical you have Edge Pro there.
I think so too. I mean, we're still accounting for a failure of something, but I would think that you would want to Edge Pro it as you normally would, like whether you had a Vortex or not would be my thought.
So Kelly, one thing that's interesting about the tests that were done out here in Glendale, Arizona, is the drops were done within the footprint of the Vortex. In other words, essentially a tripod type of a look.
Yeah, the 2012 test you're talking about.
Right. If the load is out front, I've always been concerned that a carabiner, right, is the main fails and the belay grabs the load. The carabiner can't slide, so it may creep forward, thus upsetting the resultant of the Vortex. Whereas if it was a pulley, it would slide through and may not upset the resultant of the Vortex. It'd be an interesting test to do.
I totally agree. And when I was doing my research to talk on this podcast, I've had that thought as well for quite a while. I started thinking, like, you know what? Damn, man. Like, I know I'm just talked myself into doing some testing because I believe that too. And I think what's interesting in both of those tests, the 2005 tests and the 2012 tests that we're talking about here, it was like only with an AZTEK in its shortest configuration, like right at the, a 10 inches tippy toeing over the edge part. Like there was no testing when the AZTEK was lowered, just an inch or two off the ground with, 100 feet of rope in service. And I think it's worse the more rope you have in service from your anchor to your vortex. Like if you're, if your anchor's 50 feet back from the edge, I think that's going to be I do think the running of the rope is going to, especially through a carabiner, is going to drag that AZTEK forward of the legs.
Yep.
And pull that thing forward. But you're right, it hasn't been tested. And I need to find a vortex at work that I'm willing to throw over the edge of a building accidentally. So I think that's
the other thing is it's back to how much load's on that belay line. If the belay line doesn't have a lot of load, it's not going to drag as much. But if the belay line starts to come into more in the twin tension direction, it's going to have more load. It's going to be friction on the carabiner. It's going to be harder for the people to pull up. Not a big deal going down.
Mm-hmm. No, but I'd be curious to see, a long lower twin tension through a carabiner, like how much that carabiner gets dragged forward before it resets itself back to the resultant it wants.
We've all seen this in classes where you want to change a fall line real quick and you throw a piece of cordelette and a carabiner just to make a minor deflection, and we see that carabiner move around.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yep. I definitely think it would be an interesting test. I did jot some notes down on that. I definitely think I talked myself into, trying to toss a vortex off of a building. So
there's a good reason to have a steel carabiner, huh?
yeah, absolutely. Or just run it high all the time. Solves that problem. I do think so I did some looking online. I was just looking at pictures of different major websites, I guess, in the rope industry. And even the people that advocate for this heavily, you see it operated incorrectly, I'll call it. That carabiner or pulley is not following the yoke knot. Thereby, I don't think the squeeze is worth the juice. Is that the right term? Like I think it's too much work for not enough benefit, particularly when it comes to ding dong firemen that you may work with. Not me, of course. I work with a bunch of all-stars, but you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want, right? Like you got to account for that lowest common denominator. And if that guy can't operate an AZTEK, not in a belay, just regularly, doing it in a belay system, I don't think is going to happen.
Well, it's funny, Kelly, you bring up this lowest common denominator issue. And the one thing that I've seen more often in classes when you run the main high and the belay low is a transition back up with the paradoxical motion where you say up on belay, down on main, and the guys go, what? Yeah. They don't understand. Once they do it, they go, oh, I see what you're talking about.
Sure.
But they don't understand. They're going, wait a minute. So that can be very hard. And again, you're talking about a classroom environment versus your department, a trained group of people. So again, there's that separation.
There is. And like everything else, it's I suppose it's just a matter of training. I found it interesting that we would, the supposition is that somebody, is, rigged a rack wrong or an MPD wrong. I mean, that's why we would run our belay line through an AZTEK, right? I mean, am I off base there? Like, if the vortex topples, it doesn't matter what it's through. Like you're going for a ride.
Down. Yeah.
But if somebody misoperates the lowering device, the initial lowering device, you can protect against that. Yeah.
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 Well, one thing we haven't talked about, and you mentioned the vortex toppling, and Leroy will be able to identify with this. We have a large lakefront that along Lake Michigan that basically is extremely unstable soil, and the lake is doing everything it can do to try to reclaim land along there. So we have a very miles and miles and miles of very unstable edges where it's actually undercut, very unstable soil. So no matter what, if you use an AZTEK down there, you have to back it up from the edge, which now already cuts down on its effectiveness.
Sure.
But all of a sudden, it could decide to that lake bank could decide to let loose, and the whole AZTEK now goes down.
We've actually seen it with the vortex chunking off like 3 foot thick chunks of clay 8 or 9 feet back and just literally cut in and take the whole edge off.
Oh, holy cow! So, I mean, you're definitely so not just toppling, but just the ground underneath the vortex giving way, huh?
That was that was one of our biggest concerns out when I was in Southern California as a firefighter. Was the ground was so dry that we teach you guys, hey, put your outrigger pads out if you have to, do something to disperse that load, because you are putting a tremendous amount of weight in a very small spot. You break that cliff piece right off.
Man, it's interesting to talk to people with such different perspectives. Like I don't have that, I jam a raptor foot in the dirt in the park we have running through the middle of town. But other than that, I'm not breaking off cliff edges. It's those are interesting considerations.
It's a different climate, yeah.
Well, and it is one of those things that it turns into the gravitational pull of your rescuer's head exceeds that of the earth at that point in time.
Yeah, definitely. But circling back around, if we trust a guy to set up a like an artificial high directional and run a rope rescue system, can't we trust them to also rig a device properly? Like I think the argument for, a device being rigged improperly as I just think that's I don't know, has the time come and gone for that idea? Because we're not, I think, are a lot of teams?
I think the rescue community as a whole puts a lot of effort into these abstract ideas that really never happen. We spend an awful lot of time thinking, what ifing them to death.
Well, I've seen that happen though, whereas to set up the artificial high directional, there's usually multiple people involved, getting it to the edge and everything like that. So that's just that many more eyes that are checking everything.
Sure.
But the people at the back that are rigging the lowering system, if that's the case, they might be only one of them or something. And we had a situation once where the device was rigged correctly. It was an MPD, but you have to pull on the MPD. You have to give it a jerk to make sure it latches, because rope will travel through if it doesn't have a load on it like that.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, it was set up with a high directional, and it was a fairly soft edge. It wasn't a matter of the edge coming off, but the person going over the side, he hooked into it and didn't realize that it hadn't been jerked, if you will, and he kept moving. And of course, finally it stopped. But it may not be the bad rigging. It may be this is the first load you put on that anchor, and the anchor gives way, or something's wrong with that too, aside from just rigging the lowering device.
Not fair point. No, I dig that. I think again, another plus for the twin tension for me is the positive checking of your main and belay line simultaneously. But no, that's a good consideration. Like I would, in my mind when I was formulating the argument, it's just what the heck? Like we're smart enough to set up a vortex and operate this, but not smart enough to rig properly. But you're right. People misuse friction devices. All the time. But
maybe if I could interject something, Kelly, too, I think kind of going back to Leroy's initial, answer, it depends.
Sure.
I think a good spot for the it depends argument with running both high, like in an industrial setting where you may not have a big beam or a piece of angle iron above you to run, a high directional, but you're going to use an AZTEK, a Vortex. But there where you got a bomber floor underneath you, whether it be, precast concrete, steel, whatever, there's no way that vortex is going to tip or let loose like it would on a lakefront. And you're going off of bomber anchors and back.
Yeah.
I think you'd almost be foolish not to run both high in that kind of scenario and keep it simple. And, we've done, like I said, in some of the areas in my old first duo district, that's the way we rigged, like in our power plant and stuff like that. We did run both high there, but if we were out in the lakefront or something like that, then we would definitely utilize that AZTEK.
Sure. So it comes more to analyzing the environment you're in, maybe it's not appropriate all the time. I in my world, in a big city, almost without exception, everything is bomb proof. When I do the door text, it's bomb proof. The header's bomb proof. The legs aren't going anywhere. It's fine. But I guess my lack of operating on rescues in those environments definitely limits my scope of how I think of that. So that's I guess I just need to find more hurt people in different environments, I guess.
And it's kind of like one of those things too, if your only tool is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. So
that's absolutely.
We've talked in some of the other podcasts how, it's so important to have some tools in your toolbox, be well practiced at them, and be able to figure out which tools are the best for you with the equipment you have, the people you have, and the frequency at which you can train and stay proficient.
Yeah, definitely. I know, again, where I work, I've just told them to put a belay line low all the time, and that solves most problems for us. Because I just don't have some of the guys. I wish they would, were a little more into it, but I think for us, it solves more problems for more people than trying to tell them to run it through an AZTEK or just run them both up high. Like my personal belief is I'll put them up high if the vortex is guide down. If the resultant is what's keeping the vortex in place, run one high and one low. And if it's twin tension and I'm darn certain I need I want it up high for the edge transition, down low, I'll just run them both high and then slack one of the two ropes and put it on the ground after that and just go with that. But how many mainline failures, of rigging or, aside from the one John mentioned, which is pretty neat, have we had? Like, how many mainline failures at the edge are we having that it's worth adding the complexity? For me, it's more complex, the complexity of an AZTEK and an extra edge guy. Like, has anybody else seen it besides John?
Well, and the thing that I saw wasn't really a mainline failure so much as it was just kind of that nuance where you needed to make sure the device was latched before you went down there. And
sure.
It could be similar to somebody rigging the rack and not putting all the bars in until it was loaded, taking some out, one of those sorts of things. It wasn't truly a failure, and there was no incident on the thing. I mean, there was a little bit of some wide eyes, but the problem with a lot of these things is that most rescuers, fire departments, rescue teams, whatever they are, if they have a big failure and it doesn't result in something catastrophic, in other words, an ocean investigation or something like that, we'll probably never hear about it because the natural tendency is look around behind you and kick it under, you know what I mean? Figuratively, that people are going to go, oh, crap. And what happened here? Now, obviously, some agencies are more open about it than others for the benefit of everybody to learn, but
sure,
it happens. I mean, I know of people that have had more than one incident of not cutting the desheathing main lines by using hard ascenders, and they're kind of slow learners. Most of us know about it from the accounts of others and from the testing that's been done, but I know people that are out there that absolutely insist it won't happen to them, and some where it's happened to them more than once, they still do it. So.
In the same day.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Well, that's just a lack of learning. Experience is a thing you get a second after you need it most, right? And, but if you don't learn from it, then what good is it being laid upon you? Does running in the grand scheme of things, like telling people whatever method you tell them, one high, one low, both high, or through an AZTEK. Does it create confusion for the average rescuer when it comes to tripods? Stepping away from, the vortex and maybe an easel A-frame or something like that at the edge. Does it change when it comes to tripods? Is the confusion? Has anybody seen confusion there where somebody's like, well, hey, we're going to put our belay line through an AZTEK kit on the tripod now, which obviously, if you're using like a block and tackle on the tripod, it's fine. The forces are within the footprint. But, if you put a belay line off outside somewhere into an AZTEK, obviously that resultant's going to, if you loaded the belay line, the resultant's going to end up outside of the footprint and you're going to be screwed. You're going to topple the tripod. Has anybody seen that happen or anybody try and rig that way?
Oh, I've seen it. I've asked people, hey, you can find space training. All right, I tell them, set up as you would set up.
Yeah.
And they do that. And I say, you've obviously never done this before.
Yeah.
And they kind of look at you because, and all you got to do is put a bag of sand on the end and watch the thing come flying over. And then they quickly realize that they've never thought the process through. I think Leroy and I just saw it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. I've seen him do it a number of times, not in a wilderness type or a rescue situation, a rope rescue situation, but in a confined space situation. And lots of times in our classes, when we do the ground school or the classroom section about high directionals, we talk about that ahead of time. But even then, I've seen people rig it that way because that's the way they always did it. And some of us learn when we see the thing fall down or start to fall down. It's kind of the same thing as you pull your victim out of the hole and they immediately drag it outside of the chain or the rope or whatever and try and tip the tripod over. It doesn't have anything to do with rigging and belay lines, but the physical forces are the same. And sometimes you just have to, no matter how many times you tell them, they don't learn until you see it happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's, it's not a bad way to learn, well, unless you're doing it twice in one day, like you said, Leroy. But, but, I mean, so it takes a little more for some people than others, I suppose, to get it. But, I've seen it a bunch too. I've seen it in, like videos on YouTube that people have put out. You're like, what the heck are you doing? Like, don't you know? Why are you doing that?
Right. Yeah.
But you're right. I think, working for a company such as CMC, we're pretty fortunate to be able to do a fair amount of testing, and just being as into it as we are, you get to see a fair amount of testing and know what to look for. And, at this point, I think in my journey of knowledge, like I don't take anything at face value anymore. Like I want to see it, and I want to know the numbers behind it. And I think that's an important thing for people, experienced or not, to understand. Like don't take anybody's word for it. Like go look and like really dig down and be a pain in somebody's butt about it. So, and that's really the testing with a bunch of rope and service on an AZTEK kit is something like I am itching to do that right now. Because it didn't, I've seen this stuff for 15 years now, I guess, looking at a belay line through an AZTEK kit, or an AZTEK through a carabiner. Like, man, I think it's finally time for me to test it. I don't do it, but I wouldn't mind seeing how it ends up.
Kelly, if we could go back to that, the tripod with the low belay, high belay, and so on. Sure. I know there was a training incident that some of us have seen where let's just keep it generic. There was a failure of the AHD that they had a ground belay, but there was too much slack in it.
Yeah.
So you can have everything set up, whether it be high, low, whatever, but if you have too much slack in your belay, it all comes back to basic skills. In this case, there was, and I believe there was a lower leg fracture involved in that because the slack in the belay was more than the distance to the bottom of the confined space.
Oh, dang! I've not seen that video. Like even in general,
was that the one that was missing the leg hobble?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's the one where it wasn't hobbled all the way around.
Okay. Yeah. Oh man, maybe I have seen that one. Okay.
I think I showed it to you once before. I'm not positive.
I think so. I didn't know if that one was out there for the greater world to look at.
That's why I tried to keep it a little generic there.
Fair enough.
Hey, in the interest of being generic and everything like that, there's people. Thank goodness that some of them have come forward that have videos and showed them to us, because I know people like to look at the videos, and we've all seen the ones from all around the world where, highline failures and people catapulting into buildings and whatever, pulling down brick columns with no reinforcing steel.
Yeah.
But if the people that are using those videos in their training and properly explain to them, this is what's going on and these are the forces and everything like that, there is something to be learned from it. And thank goodness in those videos that we're seeing, there's, they haven't been fatalities or anything, but I hope that people, and we know some departments have been really good about sharing their mistakes because they had videos of them for the learning, for the benefit of the rest of us. And I hope people keep doing that, and wish more people would come forward and say, hey guys, we screwed up. Thank goodness nobody was killed. Here's what we did. Don't do the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's embarrassing when you do it in front of your own department. It's, 1,000 times more embarrassing to put it out there in public, but you're right. Like we need to learn from it, as a community, but like that's a hard hump to get over.
Oh yeah. I mean, the tendency is to bury it, but other people should learn from your mistakes. And we do it on other incidents. We might not do it so much on rope rescues, but, if it's a case of a wildland fire and it, takes over a camp crew or whatever, we certainly hear about it and hear about it and hear about it. And why we don't so much for technical rescues is kind of a shame.
Yeah. I mean, you got to expect it to be happening. Like my buddy told me an excellent dad joke the other day, like why don't you see elephants hiding in trees? It's because they're so good at it, like, I don't know, like, it's a terrible joke, but like, maybe it's got to be happening. We're just hiding it, so, what are the minuses? Are there any like pertinent negatives with each system? I think the both ropes high, negative, we talked about that. I think the edge of the cliff, crumbling underneath your vortex, things like that. I can see a negative there. What about the one high, one low? What are or a negative on the both high, other than the, cliff washing away? Does anybody have any like super negatives on any of the three, high, low, or AZTEK?
Well, the one high, one low, you pretty much got to be thinking both when the load's going in and when the load's coming out, because the ropes are actually moving in opposite directions.
Sure, yeah.
So your operators, regardless of what the device is, and so your edge guys have really got to be paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah. If
you've got one high and one low, because you figure if you're coming out on your belay and you're taking up on your main, and like you said, try not to get the litter 4 feet in the air. That's kind of the key component there. But to get the load in is one thing, and we'll just use empty litter and a litter tender going in off of the edge of the cliff. That's relatively easy. It's when the loaded litter's coming back up.
Yeah.
Where you're taking up on the belay and you're going down on your main line, making sure your operators understand.
Yeah.
Because we've had a couple of pretty exciting things, or more exciting than I would like to have seen them, put it that way, in class. And granted, they weren't so catastrophic that you'd go, oh man, they were learning moments. Let me put it to you that way.
Yeah, sure. But that might be one of those things that's probably worth a pre-flight briefing before you go over the edge. Like, hey, when we come back up, like this is what we're going to do. Even I think a 15-second talk about that would probably help with that problem. But in the moment, it seems unimportant getting over the edge to talk about what's going to happen 15 minutes from now when you come back up. But boy, probably pays big dividends. Again, my flaw as a rescuer, like all of my stuff's down and down. We rarely, we don't ever come back to the top where I'm at. So it's just not necessary in my world. So, but
it's not on the lake bank either if the Coast Guard's available.
No, but but it's still a worthwhile consideration though. Like I don't think about that kind of stuff. I should, but unless I'm teaching, I'll think about it. But just my general, traipsing down the street kind of thought. I rarely think about coming back up over the edge. It's always just down and down. So, I think I just need to think about it more.
Easier, less manpower intensive, and everything else. If you can go down, let gravity work for you. But like a lot of times they said, if you've got if you're going down there to the lake front or the pit alligators, you got to go back up. So. Yeah,
definitely. That's no, you're 100% right.
And that usually is, with the lakefront things, it's, it's either a situation of, hold my beer and watch this, or a young kid out playing around or something like that. And it lets, and the edge of the bank lets loose. And that's why they're down there to begin with. Sure. So unfortunately that does mean you're bringing them back up. But one other downside too, not forget the lake bank here, because that's a nice soft edge, if you will. It just basically the rope saws into the clay, sand, and dirt.
Sure.
But think about a hard edge, though. If you're going low, you've eliminated the edge problem with the main line because it's going through the high directional. But now you really do have to worry about good edge pro and securing that edge pro, especially going down and up with that low, belay. So I think we've added one component back in that normally is kind of solved by the high directional. And again, basic skills is usually where we're going to get ourselves hurt.
That's true. I know in my world with one low, I carpet the edge with a sked. Like we called it sketch protection when we first did it, and that it's a big wide landing zone. I mean, it's slippery as hell when it's wet, but it's a really good wide spot to land your rope. That one works for me. Any pertinent negatives with the AZTEK kit that would offset the pluses of it? Anybody?
I think you said it, the coordination.
Yeah.
It's one added thing in the system, and people have to understand that you're lowering it as you go down and you're raising it as you're doing that edge transition coming back up and over. And you're not raising any higher than you need to either.
No, I think you're I think you're right with that. So
yeah, I'd said that at the beginning when I kind of tempered my initial answer on that one. It's another piece of gear.
Oh, yeah. It's
something else you have to have, and it's something else you have to know how to operate. And now all of a sudden you tell somebody to lower it out, and they don't understand that the prusik has to be pushed towards the pulley for some reason. They can't get that or whatever it is. It's just something else. And then it's somebody up next to the edge that's working there. It's just somebody else in the way or whatever. It adds a level of complexity, but in a lot of cases it might be worth the trouble.
No, I guess I can see that. Like I don't know. I've gotten so far down my road of one high, one low at work that it's, I need to open my eyes to the bigger world, I think sometimes. But, I guess I operate, like all of us, we operate in our own little micro environments, and what works there is what we're comfortable with. So I know that's where I'm at with it. Man, I had one other point. I guess it was more a stability issue. Like, if the Vortex is like rock solid bolted down, is there any negative to running both up high? I mean, hard edge of a building, tap conned into the cornerstone. Has anybody got any issues with both up high?
None at all.
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
Can't think of anything.
All right. Well, that's going to dovetail in. We'll tease it for our next podcast, or one of the next ones coming up. Is what does it mean to keep a Vortex stable? That'll be an interesting one.
Gravity.
Gravity's always there, but we can cheat it. A little. We can put forces on it that weren't intended or we hadn't anticipated. I remember what it was. Where is any of this written? Like, where do we find any of this information about Belay high, low, or through an AZTEK kit? Like, we talked about the 2005 IDERS tests. We talked about the 2012 tests in Arizona. But the user's manual from both CMC and Rock Exotica makes zero mention of the Belay line. There's nothing. So how does an end user square that? The CMC rope rescue manual does talk about it. The rope rescue manual does specifically state keep it independent of the Vortex. But there's no other. Like, it seems like a pretty big hole in the topic, always use two ropes, but here's where one of your ropes runs, and where's the other one run? Like,
yeah, and I think we just don't address it. It says always, seek competent training, and you're right. I mean, obviously, Kirk Mothner has his papers where he advocates for both high because of his testing of sharp edges. But you're right, there is not a lot of stuff out there. And it could be a liability issue, right? People don't want to say, hey, look, here's what you're going to do, because if it happens, they could say, well, hey, I followed your instructions and this happened. So,
totally. That's it. It's an interesting, not even a dirty little secret, but that's just an interesting point. Like, how do you as a trainer for, CMC teach it? How does, how do you do it with your department? Like I do things differently with my fire department where I work than I do when I'm teaching for CMC. Like there's different levels of liability. If somebody gets injured at work, like, ouch, my ankle, I'm off till Christmas, like it's not a terrible thing, but if you do it in a private class, then it's terrible. Like it shouldn't happen either way, but one way I'm liable, one way I'm not. So I'm willing to take different risks, assume different risks. But, the only like written info I can find on it, like definitively, is in the rope rescue manual from the 5th edition was the one I was referencing. It says keep it low and independent all the time, but on the cover it's got it to an AZTEK kit. Like it's just that'd be hard. That's how does an end user square that?
That's why I said it depends.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's in the appendix. The appendix F is it depends, but
and the it depends is funny because depending on who teaches the class, right? If you had a guy like you, Kelly, who says no, one high, one low, that's what you're going to teach your people.
Sure.
Right. You come to another guy, he says no, they both need to go high. So it still goes back to how they learned, which is we all have this problem. It's how we learn something.
Sure. Absolutely. And that's, we're probably biased by that. Like, boy, I learned it this way. I've been doing it this way. I've never had any issues with this way. Like, I think I'm just going to keep doing it this way. So, and that's
right.
Maybe they're all fine. Like maybe they're all great because like, we're just not having those kind of issues. I don't know. Maybe like John said, we're having little issues and people are bearing them. I don't know. So,
but I think that's one important part, though. When we do go out and teach, and I think anyone that's actually out actively teaching hands-on classes to be able to lay out, here's the options, here's the pros and cons of each. Let's help them figure out what works best for them in their situation.
Doug, that's really critical. I think it really is the best way. Like, because maybe you're just not comfortable with one way versus the other. You just don't like it. But give people the options, the pluses and minuses, and let them decide for themselves. And if they come to the correct conclusion, they'll say put a one high, one low, as I do. But I don't know. I'm biased though. Cool. Well, man, that's all I have written down in my notes. Does anybody have anything they want to add before we wrap this thing up?
No, I think it was a good discussion.
Cool. I think so too. I think in the end, as much as I'm remiss to say it, it depends. Do you want high, lower through the AZTEK? Leroy was succinct and right to the point at the beginning. We could have ended this at the 2-minute mark, but
one thing, I'm going to cram it in there anyway when we talk about different ways to do it, and I agree it depends and everything like that. But so often as a trainer, depending on the class and what you're doing, whether it's a singular department training, and they want to know one way so that they can tell everybody how to do it, and they can always do it that way, and leave out a little bit of flexibility. Whereas in our classes where you have people from hither and yon, and they're possibly have a higher motivation level or whatever it is, that they want to know all the ways so that they can make those decisions. And sometimes that's what's frustrating to some people. We go, well, you could do it this way here, you could do it that way there. I think we show, I don't know, Wayne, correct me, 4 or 5 ways to pass a knot on lowering.
Right.
And people get really frustrated because they go, well, just show me one way. And it's like, well, this one's really cool, but it doesn't always work. Or this one doesn't take any equipment, and this one's craftier, or whatever it is you want. And that's where it sometimes comes out too, is people want one way, we're always going to do it this way, and then they've worked themselves into a box. And there's other people that spend more time either practicing it or training on it, or they just have more missions, whatever it is, and sure. They want the flexibility and they can deal with it.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to their level of how much they care about rope. If I took a building collapse class, I would want one way. Like, just show me one. Like, I don't want to swing this hammer more than I have to. Like, please, let's just get this over with. And I know there's people like that on rope too. I get it, but no, it is interesting, and an open enrollment class definitely presents a different group of people. Like some people are the I don't care, and others are like, man, I want to use my shoestring and dental floss to do what MacGyver did in episode 74. Like, and you try and please everybody, and sometimes end up pleasing none of them. But you give it a shot. But I think you're right. I think the options are the best, and just talking about it through your head and seeing what works for your department. Again, for me, one high, one low, and a down and down rope rescue. That's what we do, and it works for us. But you put us out on the cliffs of Lake whatever in Wisconsin, and we're going to do terribly. But we'll do it while we look good, though. No,
we'll take you out. We'll take you out there when we took out John in the beginning of March when a northeaster is blowing in.
I'm busy
kind of
that
special
day.
Being on.
Yeah.
It's kind of special.
It's lovely this time of year like that.
Uh-huh. About a 40-mile-an-hour wind coming across the lake and sandblasting your face as you look over the edge.
Yeah, I got to change the ice in my ice cube trays that day.
yeah, me too. Got to floss my piranha's teeth. Yeah.
One of the things that goes along with that, here there's 5 of us talking that might be considered to be rope geeks by a lot of people, and I'm sure that a lot of our listening audience are that way, but hopefully some of them that are listening, hopefully they understand what we're talking about. But hopefully they'll go back and say, hey, that's something to think about because I hadn't heard of it the other way, or I never thought about that way because they were trained for one way and they may find out there's a better way to go about it. So, but nothing else, that's one of the values of these things is, well, you have rope nerds or whatever. The audience may not all be that way, and I don't mean to insult anybody one way or another, but hopefully they'll take this information and cause them to go back and think about the way they do things and adapt or change, or maybe they can feel good about themselves and say, yeah, we're doing it that way. That's great.
Absolutely.
Are you saying that the answer of that's the way we've always done it is not an acceptable reason to continue to do it that way? What's this heresy?
Nice way of saying that, yeah. I'm not saying that you're doing it the wrong way. I'm just saying make sure you're thinking about it because since you learned that way, there may be some alterations on this thing. We've talked about that on other podcasts.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And I think with all of it, like test it for yourself. It's not hard to set up these tests. It just, once you see, what you're kind of looking for, then, you can, go ahead and test and try, see what results you get. Again, I've been staring at it for 15 years, but I think I'm going to test this long rope between the anchor and the Vortex through an AZTEK and see what comes up. But yeah, just test it. Like, don't take anybody's word for it. Don't take our word for it. Go out and do it for yourself. Prove it to yourself. I think that's the best way to see it. So, anybody else have any last minute things they want to add in there?
I do not.
All right. Well, for Doug, Leroy, Wayne, John, and myself, thank you for listening to Belay, High, Low, or Through an AZTEK with an Arizona Vortex. And we appreciate your time, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly.